and that bomb goes off, our prisons will reach full capacity and the justice system will grind to a halt. This nightmare will become reality by September.
If you want to commit a bad crime, make sure you're young, because Keir doesn't want to send you to jail. All of this stuff is frankly, it's socialist claptrap. And in fact, the imperative for locking up our criminals has never been more crucial, because...
House, we understand the importance of prison. Unlike one of his frontbenchers who said, and I said, who quote, "Prison doesn't prevent crime."
But after 5, because we ain't got enough prisons, I'm going home. Now, unless I come from Mars, that's ludicrous.
Keir Starmer has brought the once great nation of Britain to its knees. It's not just bending down for rioters and signalling virtue. The UK is burning and Starmer is fueling the fire. Under the watch of Keir Starmer's government, the very fabric of British society is being torn apart as dangerous criminals are set to be released early from prison. This isn't just a bureaucratic blunder, it's a ticking time bomb that could explode in our communities at any moment. How did we reach this point where the safety of law-abiding citizens is being sacrificed on the altar of governmental incompetence? And what does this shocking betrayal tell us about the true priorities of a government that once promised to be tough on crime? These are the urgent questions we must confront.
If we do not act now and that bomb goes off, our prisons will reach full capacity and the justice system will grind to a halt. This nightmare will become reality by September.
The UK's prison system has been under immense pressure for years. With over 80,000 inmates and prison capacity maxed out, the situation is dire. In fact, the prison population in England and Wales is expected to reach nearly 100,000 by 2026. This, coupled with staff shortages and deteriorating prison conditions, has made it almost impossible to maintain order behind bars. The government's response? Starmer's new Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, announced that prisoners would be released after serving only 40% of their sentences instead of the usual 50%. While this decision excludes violent offenders and those convicted of severe crimes, there are many loopholes. Many see it as nothing more than a band-aid solution, one that sacrifices public safety for the sake of short-term convenience.
Does the early release of stalkers, domestic abusers, and those considered a risk to children sound like the work of someone who is making the country more secure?
What's particularly disgusting about this move is the sheer hypocrisy of it. When the Conservative government proposed similar early release measures, Starmer went bonkers. Was he criticising it just because he was the leader of the opposition back then? He was one of its fiercest critics, as the clip showed. He argued that such measures would undermine public trust in the justice system and endanger communities. Now, with the roles reversed, Starmer's government is doing exactly what he once condemned. So, Mr. Prime Minister, in your own words, is this the work of someone who is making the country more secure?
And in contrast to the last Labour scheme, prisoners were let out with no supervision, no electronic tags. In fact, 80,000 offenders were let out, 16,000 were violent, Mr. Speaker, leading to multiple committed. We fixed that system. But when it comes to this question, not only are we building the biggest prison programme in history, we're also deploying rapid deployment cells. And, Mr. Speaker, because on this side of the House, we understand the importance of prison. Unlike one of his frontbenchers who said, and I said, who quote, "Prison doesn't prevent crime."
The Conservative government had its fair share of flaws, but the Labour's hypocrisy is unparalleled. It also shows their underlying ideological agenda. As Rishi Sunak pointed out, these people do not like the idea of prison and would rather abolish it. Starmer being soft on crime was one of the many fears we had when he was elected. Sadly, those fears are becoming a nightmarish reality. Releasing prisoners early sends a dangerous message that we are soft on crime. It's a betrayal of the victims and their families, and it erodes the public's faith in our justice system. And today, it's Starmer's government that is orchestrating one of the largest early release schemes in recent memory.
If you're on the receiving end of a crime, you want, I would imagine, justice to be seen to be done. But really and truly, this is a short-term measure. And in order to get our criminal justice system and prisons on the right pathway, I think we need a longer-term plan. But I've got faith that they recognise something needs to be done.
A decent majority of people went into this election with the same mindset, having faith that the government would do something. However, this is a delusion at this point. We've seen the immigration policies, we've seen what happened at Notting Hill, and we've seen the two-tier Keir. When the government does something hypocritical, you don't just have faith, you hold them accountable. Any less is unacceptable, and the public realises that. Here's how the British public reacted to his horrible policy.
Currently, only 1 in 6 people support the government's plan.
It's not acceptable. Once you've done something, you should do the time for it.
You're letting people get away with things that they shouldn't.
So many people that are in prison probably shouldn't be there. They're there because they have mental health needs.
I don't think there's a choice. And as long as there's no one dangerous released, then I'm okay with it.
This Labour government insists this is an inherited problem, but if their plans fail, it could become a crisis of their own.
Keir Starmer's government is releasing thousands of prisoners early in a desperate attempt to manage the country's overcrowded prisons. Of course, the public isn't happy with it. That's like saying we're going to ruin the country. Hope that's fine. This move, other than being mostly hated by the people, not only shows the ongoing crisis in the UK's criminal justice system, but also exposes the hypocrisy of Starmer's government. After all, wasn't it Starmer himself who, just a few years ago, criticised the Conservative government for even suggesting such a plan? Now, faced with the similar circumstances of the prison system, Starmer and his ministers are forced to swallow their own words. But at what cost?
Now, in a blistering attack, as you mentioned, on her predecessors, she called the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his government the guilty men. Guilty, she said, of leaving her facing a choice between a prison system on the verge of collapse, so close to capacity it couldn't even cope with an outbreak of bedbugs, or, she said, the complete and utter collapse of law and order. Now, there is a very clear strategy here. Make absolutely plain the huge scale of this crisis. Make absolutely plain that it is a crisis not of your making, and hope that the public accept how you're trying to fix it and give you the time to do it. At least that's the plan.
Nobody wants to see a government that's obsessed with the past. This is a blame game to them, plain and simple. Sure, the issue had been brewing for a while, but we expect the new government to do something about it. It's understandable if they need time, but there needs to, at the very least, be a step in the right direction. Quite frankly, releasing prisoners early is a step in the completely wrong, bizarre direction. And the argument give it time is completely nonsensical. That's like sitting on the toilet and saying give it time. There will be roses, we all know what will happen, and it's ludicrous. Even the blame game is in bad faith. In fact, as the next clip shows, the Labour government has done this in the past.
And I'm afraid we're going to have to, have a sort of suck it up and see. In 2007, between 2007 and 2010, the Labour government then released early release on around about 81,000 prisoners. So it's not something that we should be completely surprised at from this Labour government.
Suck it up and see the chaos unfold as the once great society of Britain undoes itself. Welcome to Keir Starmer's Britain. What's important here is that they've done this before. So the whole point of blaming it on the previous government is moot. Perhaps they'd fare better if they focused more on solving the issue rather than fooling us citizens. This blame game aside, this new policy is riddled with loopholes, some of which Keir Starmer publicly admits. The most glaring one, as this next clip shows, is the loose definition.
Inevitably, if you have an early release scheme, and the parameters are simply that if you've served fewer than 4 years.
That's perhaps the biggest loophole in this scheme. A lot of horrific crimes come under the huge category of non-violent crime. Besides, crime is crime, so why should we bend the rules and use softer definitions for them? Thieves, fraudsters, rioters are all who'll roam free through the streets of Britain. And that's just naming a few categories. It's one of many attempts by the Labour government to, somehow, underplay these criminal activities. Watch this next clip, further deconstructing this ridiculous notion of petty crime.
Get rid of this definition, petty crime. All crime is crime.
Yes.
And it must be, criminals must be apprehended, they must be prosecuted, and they must be punished. And only if criminals believe that that will happen will they cease to be criminals.
Exactly.
Deterrence is what maintains law and order. This should be non-negotiable. Criminals must be punished. The whole notion that criminals are somehow victims and therefore deserve leniency is an insult to decent people who've worked hard to improve their circumstances. Even Starmer himself admits that it's a horrible idea that encourages crime since the government is throwing accountability and justice out the window. Here's the clip of him exposing his own government.
Not having enough prison places is about as fundamental a failure as you can get. And those people throwing rocks, torching cars, making threats, they didn't just know the system was broken. They were betting on it, gaming it. They thought, they'll never arrest me. And if they do, I won't be prosecuted. And if I am, I won't get much of a sentence.
In Starmer's own words, the only thing this move does is send the message that accountability is down the drain. When criminals know that they won't be caught, prosecuted, and jailed, of course they're going to commit crimes bravely. They'll only be emboldened by it. And what else did Starmer expect? Were the criminals supposed to call it a truce with the police? We'll temporarily pause all criminal activity till the government sorts out their nonsense.
The only way I can see something like that actually working, in theory even, is that if it's applied retrospectively. Because the prison service must create some headroom, otherwise we're at risk of gridlock, and we're also at risk of a summer of disturbances that the prison service frankly is not staffed or equipped to be able to deal with. But if you're doing that, you are potentially letting out, I think the Times did some maths on this, potentially letting out up to 40,000 people. And that's completely impossible.
That's exactly right. They're just delaying the problem elsewhere. With thousands of prisoners set to be released early, the burden on the probation system will be immense. Probation officers are already stretched thin and will struggle to monitor the influx of released inmates. Not to mention that many of these criminals are a threat and cannot reintegrate into society. The risk of reoffending is high, and communities across the UK are rightly concerned. According to the Ministry of Justice's own data, nearly 40% of offenders released from prison go on to commit another crime within a year. With the government now planning to release thousands more offenders early, it's not hard to see where this could lead. Crime rates, already on the rise, could spike even further, creating a dangerous cycle that the government seems ill-equipped to handle. Almost doubling down, they introduced a new initiative that's just as bad. Here are the details.
And as you outlined, it's important to distinguish the difference between two different kind of initiatives. One was the early release scheme, and this is different. I'm seeing a lot of confusion on social media where people think this is an early release scheme. It's not. It's separate to the early release scheme. So it's this Operation Early Dawn, which is essentially making sure that if people are going to be sent to court, there is a prison place waiting for them. If there is no prison place waiting for them, they won't be sent to court until then. They will either be held in police cells or they will be released on bail and then come back to court.
It wasn't enough for this new government to release criminals early. They even had to introduce a new plan. It's called Operation Early Dawn and was introduced in response to the riots and the chaotic mess of Notting Hill Carnival. Now the rioters, even if caught, can be released on bail to go back and continue to be a menace to society. Right, as if that makes it any better. She refutes herself by first saying that criminals won't be released and then saying that they'll be let out on bail. News flash, those are literally the same things.
So I break the law and I get 10 years for whatever, but after 5, because we ain't got enough prisons, I'm going home. Now, unless I come from Mars, that's ludicrous.
Even on Mars, things can't be this insane. He has a point. As respectable, decent citizens of this nation, are we supposed to be okay with this almost dystopian decision? Not only is it undermining justice, it's potentially releasing dangerous criminals back on the streets, where they can continue to terrorize people. The reporter hammers the point home perfectly in this next clip.
disrespects 99.9% of people in this country have worked their backsides off, come from absolutely nothing. They maybe just make their bills, they have a family, they pay for their house, and they don't break the law. That's why that's a cop-out. That's ludicrous. What we need to do is do something about our criminal justice system. Surely, Mike. It's like we talked, you and I, when Glitter got 16 years and was going to be allowed out. What's the point of giving somebody 16 years if they're not going to be made? And why don't we just build more prisons? Can you explain? I don't get it. I don't get it.
Exactly. We've worked our backsides off. We've done everything a decent citizen does. We deserve better than this. The criminals get a get-out-of-jail-free card, and what do we get? The unlucky opportunity to deal with more crime in an unsafe Britain. He also points out another glaring flaw in Starmer's logic. He should be focusing on solving the root cause of the problem and fixing the justice system. Instead, Labour would rather destroy the justice system. Here's what a former prison governor has to say about this.
In relation to domestic violence, rates of crime, if lots of people who have been imprisoned for that sort of offence that doesn't involve violence per se, but certainly has the prospect of violence, if they're released back into the places and back into those relationships where they've caused the harm, potentially, I think we could be looking at something rather serious.
Taking us back to the point of loopholes, not everything horrible comes under violent crime. This assurance that the government is giving us that violent criminals will not be released is a false hope. A criminal's tendency towards violence is just as crucial and, more importantly, it's impossible to assess that. Sure, a thief hasn't committed an act of violence yet, but what's the guarantee that he won't do it in the future? Especially since the criminals know that there's no real accountability left. Watch this next clip expose just how broken the system is.
Yeah, Mike, it's just ridiculous, isn't it? The criminals know that about one out of 100 thefts get solved. About 4 or 5 of 100 burglars are solved. So you've got hardly any chance of being caught at all. And then if you're caught, the Tories have got rid of 12-month sentences anyway, so you're very unlikely to go to jail. And even if you do go to jail, you're getting an extra 2 months off anyway.
So the police likely won't catch you. If they do, you'll likely not be prosecuted. Even if by some miracle you do get prosecuted and sentenced to jail, well, you'll be let out soon. If that doesn't sound like heaven for a criminal, then I don't know what is. The cornerstone of every society is its ability to deter crime. Clearly, the British government is doing anything but that. More importantly, there's a bigger issue here, one of immigration and its consequences.
They're stealing cars, just like you've shown there. All these crimes would be classified as non-violent, so they'd be eligible for this release scheme. And on top of that, you've got the government saying, oh, we're going to deport all these foreign criminals. And you know, as well as I do, that as soon as a criminal is threatened with being deported, there'll be human rights lawyers and everything else. And the chance of being deported is the same chance of me and you winning the lottery this weekend. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, isn't it something like 10 to 12% of the population in our prisons is now from overseas territories, shall we say?
Winning the lottery has a much higher chance than a foreign criminal being deported, to be honest. This just shows another glaring flaw in Keir Starmer's logic. His government has done little to tackle the broader issues leading to the rise in crime. Illegal immigration, gang violence, and drug trafficking are all on the rise, yet the government seems more focused on appeasing its base than on implementing effective solutions. That really is the heart of this problem, ideological nonsense behind the Labour's policies. They're soft on crime, they glorify criminals as victims, and we have to suffer the consequences.
There's about 88,000, 89,000 prisoners in this country, which is a lot more than it used to be. However, so think about that, nearly 90,000. He plans to release 40,000, that's nearly half of them. He also talks about not sending so many young people to jail, generally speaking. So if you want to commit a bad crime, make sure you're young, because Keir doesn't want to send you to jail. All of this stuff is frankly, it's socialist claptrap.
Usually young people play sports or have fun with friends. In Keir Starmer's world, they ought to commit crimes and face no consequences. What's staggering here is the number of releases. People don't understand how huge of a statistic that is. Imagine almost half the current number of criminals in jail being suddenly thrown back into society. Without any rehabilitation, They're just our problem to somehow deal with. This liberal bend in Starmer's ideology gets clearer the deeper you look into the matter.
It's amazing that there were people, asylum seekers, foreigners who came to this country, committed violent crimes, terrible crimes. They were completing their sentences and being allowed out.
Do you know what was even worse?
Why not send them back to their home country?
In several cases, people were not deported because they claimed, because I'm a convicted I worry about persecution in my own country. To which you think, oh, well, that's unfortunate, isn't it? Probably shouldn't have been.
They are soft on crime, clearly. Letting out heinous criminals instead of deporting them because they'd be persecuted in their own country is ludicrous. They should be prosecuted. That's the price you pay when you commit such a heinous crime. But nope, the Labour government keeps people like these around to continue committing such crimes in the streets of Britain. Their love for criminals is greater than their desire to protect us. No wonder we're the victims here.
What worries me is Starmer philosophically doesn't like sending people to prison. So you're going to get this kind of touchy-feely Labour approach that I don't think augurs well.
No, I don't think so. I do think it will come back to bite them, and they will get a little grace period from the press because the Tories have been that bad. But when the crime starts ramping up, when the violent crime starts ramping up, there will be nowhere to hide, I'm afraid, for this government, and the public will begin to lose faith, I think, in that aspect very quick.
There will be nowhere to hide, but where will we hide till that time comes? How will we keep ourselves safe? Starmer and his government do not like sending people to prison. They see it as morally wrong. The result? We get policies like these. It's a move that has been condemned by every sane person, not just because of the potential risks it poses to public safety, but because of the hypocrisy it represents. Keir Starmer's government has shown itself to be woefully unprepared to deal with the issues we face, and the British people are right to be concerned. One can only hope that Starmer and his ministers will finally start to take the issues of crime and punishment seriously. Until then, we have two options. Either continue to watch with a mix of disbelief and frustration as the government worsens one crisis to the next, or raise your voice against it and hold them accountable. The latter is the sensible approach, one in which you can help by liking the video and subscribing to the channel.